In the year 1406 before Christ, 12 spies of Israel returned from Canaan with a report that seemed impossible. They had seen Nephilim, the same beings that the universal flood should have erased from the earth forever. The flood of Noah destroyed absolutely every living being that breathed upon the face of the known dry earth. Genesis 7 leaves no room for exceptions. Every creature with the breath of life in its nostrils had perished. The Hebrew uses the verb masha, to erase, to annihilate, to destroy with total completeness and without any possible survivor. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive, according to the categorical and definitive text of Genesis. Then, how is it that the spies of Moses saw Nephilim in Canaan centuries after the great universal judgment? This is not a minor contradiction. It is the question that has divided theological schools for 3,000 years. Either the flood was not what Genesis claims, or something completely different is occurring in Numbers chapter 13, and the answer is hidden in genealogies that no one reads, written with astonishing precision exactly 3 millennia ago. These 12 men were experienced warriors, tribal leaders chosen for their bravery and sharpness of judgment. They were not men prone to panic or exaggeration. Their leadership credentials were impeccable in Israel. However, they returned with a report that shook the confidence of the entire nation to its very foundations. They said that next to those giants they felt like grasshoppers, small and insignificant, before their presence, and that brutal comparison would become one of the most studied phrases of all ancient biblical literature. To understand this mystery, we must first establish with exactness what the universal flood really accomplished. The flood was not partial, it was not regional, it was not symbolic or metaphorical as some modern theologians propose. The waters rose 15 cubits above the highest mountains known in all the earth of the moment, in Genesis 1. God separated the waters above from the waters below, establishing the cosmic order of the universe, in Genesis 7. Those limits collapsed. The springs of the great deep were opened and the sky poured out all its own. It was not an ordinary punishment, it was an event of deliberate and total decreation that completely restarted life. And in that absolute decreation, the Nephilim perished regardless of what they were or how they came to exist on earth. The judgment was completely total. The promise of God to Noah was fulfilled with perfect integrity until the last living being. If the pre-diluvian Nephilim died in the flood, the giants of Numbers 13 need a different explanation. They need a different origin, a post-diluvian source that the scriptures themselves document with admirable precision. And here's the first crucial key that most readers overlook in the reading of Numbers 13. When the spies return, they say something very specific. We saw the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak, who dwell there. That phrase, descendants of Anak, is the precise code that unlocks the complete mystery for whoever knows how to read it. The spies do not claim that these giants survived the flood through some unknown or supernatural mechanism. They are identifying their genealogical lineage, their family tree, their post-diluvian ancestor identified with a proper name. Consider the magnitude of what the spies reported. Not one or two isolated giants, but an entire nation of them. An entire nation of giants established with deep roots in the land that God had promised to Israel 4 centuries before. The cities were walled up to the sky, according to the report. The language reveals the dimension of the psychological terror, but the biblical text also preserves the answer of Caleb, which would silence the people in an instant of singular clarity. The original Hebrew text distinguishes with notable precision between the different types of beings of great biblical stature. Nephilim, the fallen ones, appears only twice in all the Old Testament, once in Genesis 6 and once in Numbers 13. But there also exist the Gibborim, mighty warriors, and the Rephaim, a race of giants of different origin, and the Anakim, the specific descendants of Anak, giants that various nations of the ancient world encountered in their history. This terminology is not random or interchangeable. Each term identifies a group with its own and distinct genealogical origin. Modern translations flatten these distinctions using the generic word giants, erasing crucial differences. But the original Hebrew distinguishes between them with an absolutely crucial linguistic precision. To understand Numbers 13, the Targums, the ancient Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible, used in the synagogues of the ancient world, bring light here. They interpreted the Nephilim of Numbers 13, not as pre-diluvian beings that survived the universal judgment somehow, but as giants that resembled them in stature and terror, but that had a completely different genealogical origin. The distinction matters enormously because it radically changes everything we think we know about this highly debated text. If they were literally descendants of the pre-diluvian Nephilim, the flood would have failed to fulfill its divine purpose. But if they are post-diluvian giants with traits similar to the Nephilim, we are facing a radically different phenomenon. The early church fathers also noted this crucial distinction with evident clarity in their preserved writings. Origen argued that they were natural descendants of exceptional stature, without any supernatural component. Augustine suggested demonic influence over certain post-diluvian lineages as one of the possible explanatory mechanisms. Jerome noted with precision the direct genealogical connection with the descendants of Canaan, documented in the same scriptures, and here's where the biblical text leads us directly to Genesis 10, the complete table of the post-Diluvian nations. 70 descendants of Noah are listed with meticulous precision in one of the most ignored chapters of the Bible. The majority of readers skip these genealogies. They are names without apparent stories, endless lists, without visible drama. But hidden under the arid surface of this text is the answer that we have been looking for since Numbers 13. The solution has been documented for 3,000 years. Preserved in a lineage that almost no one tracks with the necessary care, from the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, came every nation, every tribe, and every human group on the face of the earth. The text traces each line with deliberate care, documenting who begot whom and in what territories they settled. One lineage demands our complete attention, that of the descendants of Ham, specifically through his son Canaan. Immediately after the flood, Genesis 9 records a disturbing event. Noah pronounces a solemn and formal curse. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. A curse that would resonate with consequences for centuries. The curse was not arbitrary. It followed an act of grave dishonor towards Noah, of which the text speaks with deliberate reserve. What the majority do not notice is how this solemn curse connects directly with the problem of the giants in Canaan. Canaan was cursed. His descendants would settle in the land promised to Abraham several centuries later, and among those descendants would arise precisely the giants that would terrorize the spies of Israel in that report. Genesis 10 documents the sons of Canaan with the same meticulous precision that it applies to all the other lineages of Noah: Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, and Girgashites, nations that would occupy exactly the territory that God promised to Israel. There is a connection that becomes explicit later in the scriptures, and specifically in the book of Joshua, chapter 15. The text describes the territory of Judah and mentions Kirjath Arba, which is Hebron, identified as the city of the Anakites. Arba was the direct ancestor of Anak, Arba, the genealogical ancestor of the giants that the 12 spies encountered. Canaan begot lineages that settled in the Promised Land. Among those lineages arose Arba, the great one of his time. Arba begot Anak. The sons of Anak became the Anakim, the giants that star in Numbers 13, exactly, the Septuagint. Ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament provides details that confirm this direct genealogical connection. The ancient rabbinic commentaries trace the Anakim directly to the cursed lineage of Canaan, without ambiguity. The Hebrew provides an important physical clue. The word Anak means long neck, a clearly human descriptor. It was not supernatural in its origin. It was physiological, a genetic tendency towards exceptional stature in a family lineage. God did not repeat the supernatural process of Genesis 6. He allowed certain descendants of Canaan to grow in extreme. They arose through ordinary human reproduction within specific family lines, without any supernatural process. The scriptures never attribute to these giants direct demonic activity, nor the scenario of the sons of God of Genesis. They never portray them as anything other than human beings of exceptional stature, descendants of Canaan by natural lineage. When we examine every mention of these giants through the complete scriptures, the pattern emerges with unequivocal clarity. They appear always identified by their ancestry, always in Canaanite territory, always with specifically named ancestors. This completely changes our reading of the conquest narratives of the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua. Israel was not fighting supernatural beings immune to conventional war or to the normal weapons of the Israelite army. It was facing exceptionally large human beings, whose size intimidated them, but whose mortality remained intact. What happens when Israel finally faces these giants in real combat says everything about their true nature. Consider what the text does not say. It never affirms that the giants resulted from the same process of Genesis, chapter 6. It never suggests that there was a repetition of the scenario of the sons of God and the daughters of men in post-Diluvian times. It simply affirms that they existed, identifies their ancestor, and locates them geographically with remarkable documentary precision. The silence of the text is as significant as its words when it comes to establishing the origin of these giants. The scriptures could have described their origin as mysterious or supernatural, but instead they give a name, Anak. And the lineage of Anak is traced back through the documented genealogy to one of the grandsons of Noah himself. What no translation captures with precision is the careful genealogical architecture that the Hebrew text builds. That architecture connects each name with the next in a documentary chain that crosses generations without interruption. Arba lived in the territory of Hebron. Anak was born of Arba. The Anakim descended from Anak in the Promised Land. Each link of that genealogical chain is documented in the scriptures with the same precision of a civil registry. They die. The swords pierce them. The stones kill them. David strikes down Goliath with a single stone thrown with faith. Caleb conquers Hebron and expels the sons of Anak, being already a man of 85 years of advanced age. Joshua systematically defeats the Anakim throughout the entire mountainous region of the territory promised to Israel. The perfect consistency of these victories reveals the divine intention. The giants existed as a test of faith for the people. "Let us go up to possess it because we can certainly do it," said Caleb. Same giants, radically different perspective. The variable was not the size of the obstacle, but the quality of the faith of the observer before the same terrifying reality. 10 spies saw themselves as grasshoppers. 2 saw themselves as conquerors. The giants did not change. The perspective did change. This is what the scriptures preserve about the power of the perspective of faith in the face of obstacles that seem insurmountable. It is not denial of the reality of the obstacle. It is affirmation of a greater reality. The God who promised is greater than everything. The genealogy of the giants is precisely documented. The genealogy of the faith that overcomes them is equally documented. Each victory recorded in the scriptures follows the same invariable pattern: intimidating obstacle, firm faith, defeat of the giant. And that defeat did not come because the obstacle turned out to be smaller than it seemed. It came because the faith was greater. Hebron, the city of Arba and Anak, became the city of Caleb. The most powerful symbol was won by the oldest. At 85 years, Caleb claimed the most difficult mountain, the one occupied by the most feared giants of all Canaan. He said to Joshua, "Give me this mountain of which God spoke." That is the language of someone who remembers the promise over the fear. "If Jehovah is with me, I will drive them out of the land, just as Jehovah has said." The condition was not the absence of the giant. The condition was the presence of the God who promised, and that presence had never failed in 45 years of waiting. They did not exist because they were invincible, but because they seemed to be. Generating the psychological terror that paralyzes obedience, their size was natural. Their intimidation was fundamentally psychological. Their defeat was inevitable for the one who trusted in God. But there is something even deeper operating under the surface of this mystery that the genealogies only manage to hint at. A spiritual dimension explains why God allowed the cursed lineage of Canaan to produce these giant descendants. And it also explains why they concentrated with disturbing precision in the exact territory promised to Abraham and his seed. The timing was not coincidental. The location was not random. Their presence in Canaan reveals an invisible cosmic strategy. God promised to Abraham that his descendants would inherit Canaan 400 years before Israel left Egypt. 400 years pass. Israel multiplies in Egypt under slavery. God liberates them with portentous signs and wonders, and waiting for them positioned where God promised that they would inherit are giants that overwhelm them with absolute terror. The giants were not scattered throughout the ancient world. They were concentrated in Canaan, in Hebron, in the strategic zones. The giants dominated the mountainous region, the strategically elevated terrain, also the valley of Elah, where Goliath would fall. The ancient scholars noted a revealing pattern that changed how they interpreted these encounters throughout the generations. That is the spiritual dimension of the physical opposition, the invisible war behind the visible enemies of the people of God. And if the curse on Canaan was not only punitive, but also prophetic in its complete temporal and territorial scope, and if God allowed Canaan to produce giants, not in spite of his promise to Abraham, but precisely because of it. The enemy does not need supernatural beings when intimidating human giants achieve exactly the same strategic objective. Their objective was to paralyze the people of God with fear, to prevent them from claiming what was promised, to make them see themselves as grasshoppers without a future. The literary structure of the text itself reveals deliberate opposition at each critical juncture of the complete biblical history. Abraham receives the promise. Giants occupy the territory. Moses leads to the border. Giants block the entrance. Joshua conquers the land. Giants remain in pockets of resistance. David reigns. A giant emerges to challenge him publicly. The pattern repeats with prophetic consistency throughout the generations. Each divine advance meets maximum resistance. Each step of faith confronts intimidating obstacles designed to provoke retreat right at the threshold of the promised advance. The giants represent more than physical challenges. They embody the principle that the spiritual inheritance always has resistance. The serpent in Eden promised easy divinity. The Nephilim of Genesis 6 represented the corruption of that divine promise. The giants in Canaan were positioned as guardians of the threshold, blocking the people of God from entering their inheritance. The pattern reveals an enemy that studies the scriptures, anticipates the movements of God, and positions its obstacles with calculation. In the valley of Elah, Israel faces the Philistines, and the entire army is left paralyzed before the daily challenge of Goliath during 40 days. Morning and evening, Goliath emerges to mock the army of God without any soldier answering the challenge. 40 days. The same number that the spies spent in Canaan, that Moses spent on Sinai, that Jesus spent in the desert. Goliath represents only a military threat. He embodies the same intimidation that paralyzed Israel in Kadesh Barnea before. That fear made them feel like grasshoppers, that lie that giants are invincible when God has promised victory. But here's what changes everything in these millennial stories. The giants always fall when someone chooses to trust fully. Every time the people of God advance in faith, instead of retreating in fear, the intimidating obstacle crumbles completely. What happens on the natural plane reflects what occurs in the celestial realms in an invisible, permanent, and intense war. The cosmic chess reveals who trusts in the promises of God in spite of the overwhelming appearances of the present moment. Paul writes to the Ephesians with a clarity that resonates directly with this ancient pattern. Our struggle is not against flesh, but against principalities and powers and governors of darkness, spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly regions. The battle is spiritual even when the opposition appears as completely physical and natural before our human eyes. The giants in Canaan were flesh and blood, natural human descendants of Canaan, through the line of Arba Anak. But their strategic positioning and their paralyzing effect revealed spiritual opposition, acting through natural means. God did not rebuke Israel for observing that the inhabitants were strong and the cities were large and deeply walled. He rebuked them for concluding that that strength could prevent the divine promises from being fully fulfilled for their generation. The sin was not seeing the giants, the sin was believing that the giants were greater than the God who had promised. David saw the same giant that the army of Saul saw, but David saw something else. The proven and firm faithfulness of his God. The enemy studies prophecy with the same diligence with which the faithful study the divine promise for their life. He knows exactly when God has declared that his people will advance and positions his greatest obstacles at those moments. He does not waste resources on battles that do not threaten the eternal purpose of God. He is calculated, precise, and strategic. That is why the giants were in Canaan and not in the desert, in the promised land and not in the land of Egypt. That is why Goliath appeared when David was about to be revealed as the anointed king and not during the years before. That is why the most intense opposition always arrives at the threshold of the most significant advance in the life of the believer. The Torah has 70 faces. The sages of the Talmud taught multiple layers of meaning waiting for the scholar. The fourth level of rabbinic interpretation, the Sod mystical level, sees in these giants archetypes of spiritual resistance. The medieval fathers of the church interpreted the pattern of the giants as spiritual instruction for every generation. The fiercest resistance always occurs at the gates of the promised inheritance. That is the invariable law of faith. Will we skip the genealogies for seeming boring to us, or will we recognize that they contain answers that the centuries have sought? Will we accept superficial readings that leave contradictions unresolved, or will we press until the pieces fit? This depth of the text is not merely academic. It is the foundation on which rests the faith in the Word of God. If the text contains real contradictions, if the flood genuinely conflicts with Numbers 13, in what can we trust? But if the apparent contradictions dissolve under careful examination, then we can trust completely in the Word. David did not defeat Goliath because he was stronger. He defeated him because he remembered that God delivered him from the powerful lion and from the bear. Past faithfulness fueled the present courage. Previous deliverances guaranteed the future victory promised by God. Caleb and Joshua saw the same giants that the other 10 spies saw, but Caleb declared without doubt, "We can certainly possess it." What the scriptures do not say is as significant as what they do say about these historical encounters with the giants. The Bible never suggests that the giants possess supernatural strength, nor that the Israelite victory required something extraordinary. It never portrays them as anything other than large human beings, before whose natural vulnerability the applied faith was always sufficient. The same principle that allowed Caleb to conquer at 85 years applies to every obstacle of every generation. The temporal dimension of faith is crucial. Caleb waited 45 years to claim his promise and arrived stronger. The genealogies that the text preserves with meticulous precision are the proof that every detail of the word can be trusted. If the genealogies are precise, the names are exact, the patterns are intentional, then the promises are also so. And if the promises of God are as reliable as his historical record, then no giant has the final word. The investigation that we have carried out reveals something that goes much further than theology. It reveals the immutable character of God. It is the God who fulfills his promises in every generation and documents his faithfulness even in the most arid records of his word. That is God who allows the giants not to fail in his promises, but to reveal that faith always overcomes intimidation. God does not eliminate the giants before his people encounter them. He allows the intimidation, the fear, the imposing obstacle. Faith is not tested in easy circumstances, but under overwhelming probabilities that demand a deeper trust. The pattern of the cosmic chess becomes undeniable when we trace the complete thread from Genesis to the books of Samuel. The question was not if the obstacle was large. It was if the people would believe that the divine promise was infinitely larger still. The pattern that the scriptures reveal about the giants completely transforms how we understand our own situation today. The promises of God towards you are as certain as his historical promises to Israel. His faithfulness does not diminish with time. His power to overcome intimidating obstacles is as absolute today as it was in every battle that the scriptures record at. The same God who fulfilled his word in every generation of biblical history continues to be exactly the same God today. The spiritual battle that you face today reflects the ancient pattern. Obstacles positioned to paralyze faith before the advance. Each giant falls before faith. Each obstacle crumbles before obedience to the voice of God who promised the inheritance. Each intimidating enemy collapses when the people of God remember his promises and advance without waiting for the fear to disappear. David did not wait for the fear to leave before facing Goliath. He advanced towards him while the heart still beat with force. The difference between the 10 spies and Caleb was not the absence of fear, but the decision to trust in God in spite of it. Your giant watches you, waiting for you to retreat. Your inheritance awaits beyond that threshold that fear makes look impossible. This question, formulated in the desert before the report of the spies, resonates with equal force through every human generation. The same enemy that positioned giants in Canaan to paralyze the people of God uses exactly the same tactic today. The apparent conflict between the Nephilim of Genesis and the giants of Numbers dissolves when we trace the genealogy of the text. The Nephilim of Genesis 6 were destroyed in the flood. The giants of Numbers 13 came from Canaan by human genealogy. Each apparent contradiction becomes proof that the scriptures can be trusted in every detail they contain. The genealogies are exact, the terminology is precise, the patterns are intentional, the inheritance is real. The Word of God does not ask to ignore difficulties. It invites to deepen until the pieces align with total clarity. Your giant is not there because the promise of God has failed. It is to reveal if you will trust in the Word more than in the fear. The question is not if the obstacle is large. The question is if you will believe that the promise of God is eternally larger than it. If this mystery ignited in you the desire to deepen into the most hidden truths of the Scriptures, subscribe right now.